Hello there, and welcome to another episode of The Author's Pen. I'm your host, Jason Hutchens. Joining us today is investigative journalist and author Doug Fine. Mr. Fine has reported from 5 continents for publications such as The Washington Post, Wired, Salon, The New York Times, and High Times, among others. He's the author of 2 previous books, the first being Not Really an Alaskan Mountain Man, and the second one titled Farewell My Subaru. His most recent book is called Too High to Fail, and it explores the implications of a United States where cannabis is legal. Doug, first of all, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be with you, Jason.
All right, and where are you coming at us from?
Right here on the Funky Butte Ranch in the middle of the wilderness in New Mexico.
I wasn't even aware that New Mexico had a wilderness.
Oh yeah, in fact, I actually live adjacent to the nation's oldest federally designated wilderness in the lower 48 states' largest wilderness.
Wow.
And it's great except for the mountain lions that have been eating my chickens.
Well, you need to lock them up, perhaps. I don't know. I don't have a solution for that. I don't have that kind of problem where I live. So before we get into the subject matter of the book, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up becoming a journalist and an author?
Really was one of my first jobs was writing for the local newspaper, a sports column covering my own tennis team. And right from the beginning, I was always trying to impart humor into it. And what I I like to call it comedic investigative journalism. I've been at it for more than 20 years now, and so I feel as though I aim for unimpeachable journalistic standards, but bring in people that don't necessarily agree with the premise or necessarily think that they have a stake in the particular topic by making them laugh. So that's the basic idea, and it's usually first-person and self-deprecating humor surrounding mistakes that I make, being unprepared for covering the topic. So you've mentioned all the books I've written so far, as well as I've done a lot of short journalism, 5 continents. But in the case of Not Really an Alaskan Mountain Man, the title pretty much sums it up. I grew up in the New York suburbs and then suddenly plopped myself down to the great amusement of the locals at a cabin, 11 miles from the nearest town in Alaska. And for the second book, I thought that sustainability was a fairly important, if not imperative topic to cover. So I basically decided to live without petroleum, wrote a book about that. And most recently, I saw, both as a citizen, a patriot, a father, and a journalist, that the drug war is a great, we're a great country, the greatest country, but great countries make mistakes. And I saw it's one of our really terrible policies, along with segregation and a few other big mistakes that have happened in our nation's history. And I thought it was important to write a book about alternatives to our nation's longest war, which is the drug war.
Okay. Well, what actually got you interested in doing a book about this topic? I mean, you had all these scenarios that you set up for the prior 2 books. Why decide to do this one on this particular topic?
I live in a border state, very close to the border, in fact, in southern New Mexico. And so the civil liberties impacts of the drug war affect my life almost every time I leave the ranch. I have to drive through Border Patrol checkpoints and endure what I consider to be Fourth Amendment violations. I have to stop at checkpoints while armed men look into my vehicle and ask me questions about my citizenship and where I'm going and what I'm doing. And I don't think that that is in sync with the principles of our nation. Furthermore, in 40 years and with $1 trillion taxpayer dollars spent on the drug war, with almost no effect on supply or demand, it's obviously been, from a practical standpoint, an utter failure. At this point, it's just a $30 billion a year welfare program. It happens to be welfare for law enforcement and prison groups and lawyers, but welfare nonetheless, meaning it's the government sponsoring and paying money out to make something exist that it wouldn't otherwise exist. We accept all kinds of welfare. I personally think welfare for our neediest citizens, for instance, food stamps, that's a great thing. I support certain types of price subsidies and welfare supports for farmers of certain crops to make sure that American farmers can thrive and that we have enough food, for instance. But the drug war is not providing anything good. It's only providing civil liberties problems and enrichments for cartels. So most Americans, I think, already know that. Something like 80% of Americans polled now regularly say the drug war is an utter failure. But as a journalist, I didn't want to just suggest problems. I wanted to suggest solutions. And then two incidents happened that sort of clinched it for me, that made me decide this was going to be my next book. The first one was a retiree neighbor of mine, perfectly respectable fellow, closest property to mine, which is pretty far away because I live on a fairly remote ranch. Nonetheless, one morning, instead of the normal hummingbird wings that wake me up in my, in their feeder outside my windows, it's sort of my alarm clock most days. That's how quiet it is around here before the morning goat milking. One day, it's the final scene out of the movie's Goodfellas. There's helicopters, planes. There's like 50 guys in white SUVs trying to look inconspicuous with little earpieces on when, if it's not a coyote in the creek bed, we recognize it. The drug war, only the drug war, brought automatic weapons into the nearby, into my family's situation. I've got little kids. And they were going after this old guy for someone turned him in for whatever, a dozen cannabis plants that incidentally he was using for personal use, self-medication for some emotional stuff that now in New Mexico, since having implemented its medical cannabis program, would be perfectly legal. Millions of dollars that day spent. He didn't spend a day in jail, not that he should have. His lawyer was waiting for him at the El Paso Processing Center. Complete waste of money, putting my family in danger. Concurrently, the mayor of nearby Columbus, New Mexico, a sleepy town since Pancho Villa invaded in 1916, turns out he is a card-carrying member of a south-of-the-border cartel supplying U.S. guns down to fight cartel battles over the border. This guy, working with impunity for years, that's not where the tax dollars were going. He eventually got busted and recently got sentenced to 50-something years in prison. But it was just, the priorities were so just topsy-turvy and unacceptable that I decided I have to do a book about it. So I did the research, and what I found was that there is a model in the U.S. for what happens if you just declare drug peace, unilaterally end it, and it's in Mendocino County, California.
Okay, excellent. Well, we've got to take a quick break right now, so when we come back, we'll get into some of your ideas about what a drug peace era would look like. So we'll be right back, folks, after these messages.
UNCP students spend summers studying in Costa Rica, learn about the biological diversity of the tropics in a biology course, or chronicle the natural beauty of Costa Rica in a communications course. This 14-day study abroad is jam-packed with adventure. You'll hike through rainforests, visit pineapple and coffee plantations, travel to a volcano, go snorkeling and whitewater rafting, and learn firsthand why Costa Rica is such a unique and beautiful place. Financial aid options are available for qualified individuals. For more information and a free brochure, contact the Office of International Programs at UNC Pembroke, or visit the Department of Mass Communication in Old Main or the Department of Biology in the Oxendine Science Building.
Welcome back. Welcome back to the Author's Pen. I am here with author Doug Fine, whose latest book is Too High to Fail, and we are in the middle of discussing some implications that are in this book. Doug, you believe that the United States is on the brink of what you call a drug peace era. Help us understand what that is and what it would look like.
Sure. I mean, we spent the last 40 years and $1 trillion pursuing an unsuccessful policy of trying to eradicate different drugs that, for whatever reason, at times societies have thought unacceptable. And the one that I focus on is cannabis, because humans have had a millennia-long relationship with the plant. It is considerably less dangerous than alcohol, and it's where most of drug war money goes. It also creates up to 70% of organized crime drug cartel profits, just as alcohol prohibition created Al Capone and bootleggers. So I did the research into what would happen if we stopped doing that, if we stopped spending $30 billion a year trying to keep cannabis out of the legitimate economy, and found that there would be a great benefit. One of the places that, well, the place that I really specifically researched, although I extrapolated into a nationwide and a worldwide analysis, but the place that I analyzed and researched for a year, I lived for one farming season in Mendocino County, California. What happened there was, in fiscal crisis, the local county government, in sync with the sheriff's department, decided to acknowledge what the sheriff calls the T-Rex in the room. That's the $6 billion annual local cannabis economy. The number one currently federally legal crop in Mendocino County is grapes, worth $74 million. So if you were a young 4-H farmer with a green thumb, which crop would you choose? they decided to acknowledge it and tax it, basically, bring it above ground. They issued zip ties, bright yellow sort of bracelets for each of up to 99 plants per farm, sustainable growing standards, all kinds of zoning in it, like any farming industry might be regulated. It was an unmitigated success. 100 brave farmers came up above ground to declare what they do and pay their taxes and pay the local county fees, which were $8,000 roughly per season for a crop worth between $200,000 and $500,000 if the farmer could avoid things like mold, rain, and federal raids, because federal government isn't on board yet, suppressing this multi-billion-dollar industry. The program was a tremendous success. Besides the revenue raised, which saved 7 deputy sheriff positions that had been slated for cutbacks, it also reduced local crime significantly. Captain Randy Johnson, who administered the program for Sheriff Tom Allman, told me that saving the deputy positions were great because Mendocino hasn't hired more extra deputies since 1972. And so they weren't looking forward to losing 18% of their force. But they also, he said he was getting calls for the first time on things like domestic violence and home invasion because an entire segment of the society had been brought into the law-abiding fold. And, when the sheriff issues your zip ties, your permits for your plants, you know that you don't have to worry about the plants being seized when you call law enforcement on another issue. So it really was a terrific test case for what will actually happen when the 40-year drug war ends and the drug peace era begins. And we're just scratching the surface in terms of revenue, too. Harvard economist Jeffrey Myron talks about something like a $50 billion boon annually to the U.S. economy from cannabis when you combine the transfer of the current taxpayer money that goes into the drug war, combined with the taxable revenue and jobs created from the cannabis industry. And that's both psychoactive, spiritual / medicinal cannabis and what I believe to be an even larger sector long-term, which is the industrial cannabis / hemp side of the industry.
Wow, yeah, and in your book you had some really amazing, very eye-opening numbers. You talked about that the economy, the legal economy that currently exists already generates 20 billion taxable proceeds from just 200,000 registered users across 16 states. I mean, that was jaw-dropping when I read it. What other types of implications does that have for a legalized cannabis economy?
I mean, short of saying that we're going to solve the nation's financial problems by legalizing cannabis, just about anything else good you could say about the plant is true. In other words, to say it could be a major factor in providing revenue, not just on the federal and state land, but for local communities that organize it right. It's not an exaggeration to say a major part of the fiscal recovery for our country. One example there is California already raises $100 million just in sales tax from medical cannabis. So it's already sort of an integral part of the California economy, even though the vast majority of California cannabis farmers are still black market farmers. In other words, they're not part of the above ground medical cannabis program yet. A second part of this that I think has real potential for any communities that really want to be on the ball is empowering. So you're empowering farmers, small farmers, to go back to the land to grow this crop, but you can have things like centralized processing facilities, which ensures quality and testing and uniformity for the cannabis crop. But on top of that, you can provide regional power for your county, let's say, in any part of the country, by using the otherwise compostable stalks into, let's say, a fermentation or a gasification facility. And these are projects that are implemented already in places like Brazil and Germany and underway in the planning stages in places like Kentucky. So we might be able to, at the same time we end the drug war, we might also be able to wean from foreign oil and also provide distributed, independent regional energy supply for communities around the nation, as well as putting small farmers back on the land, which is something I think would be really good for America.
Wow, okay. Very quickly, to research this book, you were in this, I believe you called it the Emerald Triangle. What was that like? We've got a very short time before we hop to a break, but can you kind of quickly describe what that was like, what that area was?
Sure. The shorthand for the Emerald Triangle is the 3 counties in Northern California that are known for being big outdoor cannabis cultivation counties. Those are Humboldt, Mendocino, and Trinity counties. But Santa Cruz County, Lake County, there's Nevada County. There are so many counties in California that are huge cannabis farming counties, and you name it. Pop into Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and British Columbia, Kentucky, Hawaii. I just got back from giving a talk out in Hawaii. There's very few places where America's #1 cash crop is not cultivated.
Wow, okay. Well, folks, we're going to go and take a short break right now, but we will be back in a moment and talk more with Doug Fine about the findings of his book. So stay tuned.
UNCP students spend summers studying in Costa Rica, learn about the biological diversity of the tropics in a biology course, or chronicle the natural beauty of Costa Rica in a communications course. This 14-day study abroad is jam-packed with adventure. You'll hike through rainforests, visit pineapple and coffee plantations, travel to a volcano, go snorkeling and whitewater rafting, and learn firsthand why Costa Rica is such a unique and beautiful place. Financial aid options are available for qualified individuals. For more information and a free brochure, contact the Office of International Programs at UNC Pembroke, or visit the Department of Mass Communication in Old Main or the Department of Biology in the Oxendine Science Building.
The Public Relations Student Society of America is an organization for students interested in public relations and communications.
To me, PRCSA is an opportunity for students, regardless of major, whether it's broadcasting, PR.
To me, PRCSA is fun.
What can PRSSA mean to you? For more information regarding PRSSA, check out our website at prssa.org. Look forward to seeing you.
Here at UNCP, Housing and Residence Life offers on-campus living. Some resident halls have history, others are fresh to the UNCP campus. UNCP offers both apartments and resident halls. Regardless of your decision, all come with a wonderful staff and awesome community programming. So which will you choose? Remember, living anyplace else is common and pointless.
UNCP students spend summers studying in Costa Rica, learn about the biological diversity of the tropics in a biology course, or chronicle the natural beauty of Costa Rica in a communications course. This 14-day study abroad is jam-packed with adventure. You'll hike through rainforests, visit pineapple and coffee plantations, travel to a volcano, go snorkeling and whitewater rafting, and learn firsthand why Costa Rica is such a unique and beautiful place. Financial aid options are available for qualified individuals. For more information and a free brochure, contact the Office of International Programs at UNC Pembroke, or visit the Department of Mass Communication in Old Main or the Department of Biology in the Oxendine Science Building.
Welcome back, folks. We are still here with Doug Fine, whose latest book is called Too High to Fail. So Doug, if we are on the brink of this new green economy, at the brink of this drug peace era, how are entrepreneurs trying to take advantage of it? What are folks doing to try and be able to make money off of this pending legalization of cannabis?
In too many ways to describe in full, but one of the elements that I'm focusing on doing a lot of journalism about now is the idea of keeping the small farmer viable, especially with sustainable farming practices, as opposed to what many small farmers fear right now about the drug peace era, which is that Philip Morris or Coors or big alcohol or big tobacco or big pharma will move in, and that's what you'll find in your corner store. And so I'm doing a lot of reporting on plans to keep the top shelf, sustainably grown, organic principled, fair traded, farmer supported model going, so that if someone goes into their food co-op or their Whole Foods, they'll have this option that's not just sort of mass produced and pesticide heavy plant.
So I'm curious, I mean, how would they actually be able to prevent that? Because I know, for instance, in the wine industry, that very phenomenon happens. You have these small grape growers, but really in the end, they end up getting bought out by major companies like Kendall Jackson and things like that. I mean, are they thinking about the process of how they would be able to maintain that, or?
Very much so, yeah. So there's a group called the Emerald Growers Association in Northern California that's really all about branding the region the way that champagne, you can't call anything that's not grown from that region champagne, or same with Parmigiana cheese in Italy is based on a region. And so the farmers there are trying to get ahead of the curve and make sure that they are able to survive, when big money comes into this industry.
Okay. Obviously, there are a number of forces that want to prevent the decriminalization of cannabis. What kind of insight does your book talk about that, or does
well,
it?
It's done. It's over. The Berlin Wall has fallen with Colorado and Washington voters, the people, deciding that it's done. Arkansas had a medical cannabis initiative on its ballot with almost no support, huge legal obstacles thrown to even getting on the ballot, no money for it, and it failed 48 to 52%. In other words, if it had anything like the kind of support that the other initiatives had, it would have passed by large margin and will next time. So the American people know the truth. The rhetoric is counterproductive. Now, the only people that are making the argument for keeping the drug war going have a vested interest in it, and they're not speaking for the best interests of America's economy or her public safety and families, because I represent that as well as I do the economic side. As a father, I'm not going to advocate something that I don't think is better for the public safety of my children. In other words, I believe the end of the war on cannabis is going to reduce crime and reduce access to the legal drugs to my children. And so, there's still people out there, they're paid with our taxpayer money, and they're spouting the same lies and fake science that they have been for 40 years. And the difference now is that critical mass has been reached. The tipping point has been reached where old, young, Republican, Democrat, men, women, everywhere I go, nobody buys it anymore. I live in a very conservative valley in New Mexico, and I tip my hat to the 80-year-old cowgirl in the post office, and she asked me what's my next book about. And I tell her it's about an economic argument for ending the drug war. She says, "Well, it's about time. This is the cartels is the problem, and the pill addiction is the problem, and alcohol is the problem. It's time to stop fighting a stupid drug war about cannabis." And that's the response I get everywhere now.
Okay. Well, your book is largely supportive of the idea of decriminalization, but you do go in to talk about some potential downsides of it. Could you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, and I mean, it's absolutely anything, if not handled right, can be a problem. I think that the biggest danger of legalizing cannabis is that energy-intensive, unsustainable indoor growing practices may predominate as opposed to sustainable outdoor practices. And as a sustainability journalist, I mean, we're powered by solar power here on this interview today. So I really have no time for anything that is not a sustainable industry anymore, because the survival of human species is at stake. And so that's my biggest worry. Anything else that you hear the scare tactic people push in terms of addiction and stuff like that is not borne out by any studies at all. The places that have legalized cannabis and ended the drug war, such as Portugal and Amsterdam, are seeing not only steady use rates with a significant decrease in crime, but significant decreases in youth rates in both of those countries. So when the lure of the forbidden goes away and it's regulated, for people over 18 or 21 or whatever the age is in a particular state, we're going to see access to youth go down from the unprecedented level today. It's never been more widely available, and criminals don't ask for ID. So if we erase 29 of the $30 billion a year that we're paying in our taxes to lose this drug war, and spend that last billion on real education about the body and the mind and addiction and substances and healthy use versus abuse, and make sure that people aren't using it when their bodies and minds are still developing. Anything. I'm not talking about alcohol or anything. Our nation's real addiction is prescription pills today. And so, those kind of downsides I consider to be minor, and I consider that we'll see actually public health increases when the drug war ends.
Okay, and we're getting a little short on time, but I do want to talk a little bit about the writing process before we wrap things up. Could you tell me, could you tell me about what the most challenging part of trying to tell a story like this is?
I have to say, the writing of Too High to Fail, from the moment that I wrote the proposal to the moment that I did one revision, it was my second draft that wound up being the final book, was an unbelievable pleasure. Part of it has to do with the publisher Penguin's strong support for the book and working with great editorial staff there. And but for whatever reason, Mendocino County was where I set up for a year, was very, very receptive to the book. The sheriff would speak to me on the record and be very candid. If you read the book, he said some super funny things about, one time he said, his words, if I were sitting in my office right now, Doug, and I saw someone walking outside with a pound of cannabis under their arm, I wouldn't get off my ass to do something about it. And I'm sort of typing going, wow, the sheriffs wouldn't get off my ass. So it was really remarkably supportive. The farmers were all supportive. I think people are ready after generations of being outlaws to come above ground. And so therefore the crafting of the book was really easy. From a literary perspective, the feds came in and just unacceptably, absurdly came in and started raiding these locally legal Chamber of Commerce member, above ground tax paying, cartel herding farmers, because they were unarmed. Basically, they were easier to fight than the real criminals. And they came in and busted them. And some of these guys were people that I'd been following closely for a year. The sheriff's coming to their birthday parties and everything. And when I went to visit one of these guys after his raid, he'd been kept, something like 9 hours separate from his wife, no access to lawyers, days before his crop was harvested, depriving 3,300 of his patients of his medicine, including many cannabis patients, some of which I interviewed in the book, cancer patients. I went to his farm, Matt Cohen is his name, and I was full of sympathy for this guy. He was really trying to do a good thing. He's collected very little money over the course of the years, which is part of the lies that the U.S. Attorney in Northern California is saying, is that only profiteers are operating, and that's all they raid, people that are getting rich off this. Which, imagine saying that about a pharmaceutical company. These pharmaceutical companies are only getting rich. Their CEOs are only, they're making $7.3 million a year. Throw them in jail. It wasn't even true in the case of Matt Cohen. So I show up and full of sympathy, and he looked at me and he says, "Boy, this is going to be great for your book, isn't it?" And I thought about it and said, "My God, I guess it is, but that's not what I'm here to talk about." In other words, it really made Too High to Fail read like a real page turner. All these farmers working for 10 months only to have their government, that they're trying to support with their taxes, patients they're really trying to help growing sustainable, healthy medicine, come in with machine guns basically and bust down their doors. So it does make for a great read. And it's been an absolute pleasure to cover this topic.
Right. Well, Doug, I certainly enjoyed it. We are out of time, but I do want to thank you for joining us today to discuss the book as well as your career. Doug Fine's latest book is called Too High to Fail. It's a thorough look into what decriminalization of cannabis can do for the United States economy. It's available on Amazon, local bookstores, and it's also downloadable for e-readers everywhere. It's a great read. I encourage you to check it out and decide for yourself. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us for this edition of The Author's Pen, and we will see you next time.